Men at Reddit who proposed and she said no. What happened afterwards with your life? She said yes on the second proposal and now we're divorced. Edit. Reddit is such a weird place. All the carefully thought out posts and comments get zero recognition, and then this random off the cuff remark is my most liked comment. Glad you all got a kick out of it. For those wondering, I've been single for a year. I spent last night with a smart, beautiful woman and had a blast. Life is good. Second edit. Thanks mods. My life is now complete and I can die knowing I made a difference. We were living together. I asked. She said no. I love you but I need to think about it. I don't think I'm ready yet. Can you give me some time and ask later? A few months go by. I ask again. Same response. A few more months. Same deal. A couple more weeks and then she says, hey, what do you think of us getting married? I replied. That's an excellent idea. Why didn't I think of that? Our 39th anniversary is next month. She had said she wasn't really a fan of marriage. So I thought proposing non-marriage might be well received. And I wanted us to be together for the rest of our lives. So I asked her not to marry me. She said no. We have been married for 10 years. Dated a woman for over 2 years and popped the question. First time she said I don't know. A couple months later I asked her again. She said maybe. I was pretty bent out of shape. But then I found out she was sleeping with several of my friends, so I dodged a bullet there really. Damn dude, I'm sorry about your friends. Genuine shitty bags of people to knowingly sleep with your girl. I hope you find better friends. We lived together for another 6 years until she changed her mind and told me that I should ask again. We were engaged for over a year and got married in 1991. We are still married, have 3 children, and are both still very much in love. It was really bad for a while. Then it was really bad. Then it became really bad. Then it became bad. Then it was just blah. Then it was neutral. Then things started to get better. They continued to get better by me learning to be happy and me doing me things. I eventually found someone else. And things have been getting better for 20 years now. I asked her right out of high school. But she wasn't ready. We stayed together. Went to college at the same school. Spent the first year in separate dorms. Then moved in together. Got married a few years later. Our 20th is coming up. She said yes as I had a special occasion planned. One of those observation wheels, and I proposed at the very top and we were on our way to a family event and I had a ring made and everything. Then a few days later she said no. Everything fell apart. I was distraught. We continued dating for a while but it was long distance, other side of the world. When I visited it would be super awkward. Eventually dad kicked me out. Was flying standby and was stuck in an airport for 4 days. Took me years to recover. Now I am happily married and I'm glad it never worked out. I was not in a good place when I met her and her family was super controlling. It would never have worked. The woman I married is super cool and is my best friend. Turned out better than expected. She had cancer. I said we should get married because I had full medical coverage from my work. She said no. And over time we grew apart. Haven't talked to her in 15 years. Don't know if she died. I know a couple who did just that. He proposed in order to give her citizenship and health insurance so she could remain here and get cancer treatment she desperately needed. They stayed married for about 15 years and he even adopted her son. But they never lived together or were romantically involved. Years later, they divorced when he met the woman of his dreams and wanted to get married. They are all very close friends. With no drama. She lived and is a university professor now. He is in another state with the woman of his dreams. My mother turned my father down. But didn't outright break up with him. She just wasn't sure about the marriage idea. She valued her independence and was nervous about commitment. No hard feelings. Though. He called up the next day when she'd had more time to think about it. And she said yes after all. They celebrated 32 years of marriage last month. I was the person who said no. We had only known each other for 3 months and he was smitten. I was more cautious. I said no. I like you but it's way too soon. He asked when would be enough time. I said maybe a year. He proposed again at midnight. 1 year after we first met. I said yes and we have been together 8 years now. Edit. I know a year was still not a long time. But we had a long engagement and didn't get married for another 5 years. This is the story of my parents. My dad asked my mom to marry him several times. She said no. Several times. One day my dad asked my mom to marry him, yet again. She said yes. He freaked out and left her apartment and dumped her. 3 weeks later he hated his life without her and begged her to take him back and marry him. They were married 9 months later for 16 years until my mom passed from cancer. They loved each other so much and had such a deep appreciation for each other. That was 25 years ago. My dad has not remarried. No one will ever come close to my mama. My dad proposed to a woman who said no. My dad was a violent alcoholic and she said she couldn't be with him unless he got clean. Took him a little while. But he did it. He wound up meeting my mom through a matchmaker and they've been married 25 years. If that woman never said no to him, he never would have gotten clean. It was the lowest points in his life. But it all brought him to my mom who makes him happier than ever. My dad talks to her sometimes. She got married to someone else and they had a son who died from a medical condition. I spoke to her about it beforehand. And she seemed really keen on the idea. So I decided to propose about a week after in front of all our friends. She was so shocked she picked me up off my knee and shooed me away. Most of our friends were confused. Because everyone knew it was going to happen. And she said she was excited for it. I didn't know what to do. It was all really embarrassing and later she explained she didn't mean no, she just didn't know what to say and was scared. She said yes after apologizing profusely and just this year we celebrated our 9th anniversary. Edit. I'm happy that this comment blew up. But I feel like the next time I tell someone it as an icebreaker they're going to say I read this on Reddit. My mom told my dad no when he proposed to her even though they were already living together. She thought he was impotent and it wasn't until she got pregnant that she said yes. In retrospect, I wish my parents had decided early in their relationship that they can barely stand each other. My husband asked 3 times in the span of a couple months. We had dated for 3 years. He was ready. I wanted to graduate college first. Also, don't propose by handing your sewer ring while you're both in the car on the way to Burger King. I'm low maintenance. But put some thought into it. Not my story but someone I'm friends with. They both had shitty homes and became a couple at 14. Somewhere around 20 he proposed to her. She said she wasn't ready to commit yet. After that he'd propose to her every year partially in hopes she would be ready, but it was also kind of a ritual where he would show her that he's still serious. She would say no every time. In their late 20s he was done with his studies. She could see the finish line so she told him she's ready, meaning marriage and eventually children. That's when he gets second thoughts about marrying the only woman he ever had a relationship with and he wasn't sure if he was making a mistake. They went on a break. She went to the US from Europe to do her PhD at the MIT. They drifted apart more. She moved on and found a new long-term relationship with a partner that's a lot better for her while he quickly regretted ending the relationship and started f***ing whoever he could find on Tinder without being able to form a meaningful relationship after. We'd been dating for 1.5 years. And I was due to move out on orders, was in the army. She suggests we get married. I said no way. I was going off to school, army type, for 6 months. Then 1 year on a deployment to the Middle East. It just wouldn't work. She was calm. And then said you think I'll be a burden to all of that. But I'll actually be a help. While just seconds earlier all I could think of was what a pain in the ass it would be to get married and leave. And now it, for whatever reason, seemed perfectly reasonable that she was right. We got married a week later at the courthouse. I was 22. Last month we had a nice socially distant dinner party for our 29th anniversary with our 2 amazing kids and a few friends. We met in her home country of Germany while I was traveling. I knew I was in love. We dated long distance for a while. Me flying to Europe. Her flying to the US. I suggested marriage so we could be together. She said no a few times. I didn't press. But I was patient and not being pushy. I knew she was worth the wait. Then it hit her that's how we could be together. If we got married, we could live in a country together. The difficulties of being born on a different patch of dirt. A few years later, I'm still married to my best friend and living with her in Germany. Not all no's stay no. Life goes on. About 2 years later I met my wife of 22 years. We are happily married. The one who said no got married. For the first time. Last year. And seems happy. My wife is way into me in ways that the former girlfriend never was. And I see my life as far happier with my wife than I ever was with the one who said no. She's not a bad person. I was just young and in love with someone who wasn't in love with me. It worked out for the best. I'm glad she said no. Dim sum, but especially chung fan. It's my favorite dim sum dish. It's just shrimp wrapped in rice noodle with a sweet dipping sauce. But oh my god, is it delicious. Dim sum is generally pretty inexpensive and there's so many dumpling options to choose from. My mother told my father no 3 times. On the 3rd time he got wasted at a local bar and basically started pouring his heart out to anyone who'd listen. Mind you, it's a very small village in the Italian Alps and my father barely spoke Italian and no one in the village spoke English. Including my mother. Word got back to my mom about this sad American at the bar, so she went to find him and she told him she'd marry him. My parents celebrated their 44th anniversary last month. Not me, but a guy I knew. Proposed to his then girlfriend in a restaurant. Made sure to have a friend record it. She walked out when he popped the question and pretty much ghosted him. He started drinking. Found a new passion in gambling and gambled all his savings away. He ended up living on money of the state. Works a garbage picker job now and almost set his house on fire at least 4 times that I know of by making food and falling asleep drunk. He was an interesting guy. Friendly to some, but the state he's in is just sad. Hope at some point he picks up his life again. Haven't heard of him in years though, so no idea where he is now. We actually got married. Moved in together. 2 weeks later. She moves out. Blocks me everywhere and never gave me a reason. Shortly after I was served with papers. Now I'm divorced. That was last summer and not sure where I am now. Making work my main priority for now. I just want to know why for some closure. But that's too far gone now. I proposed to my husband several times before he did. I know this question was specifically targeting hetero males. But this applies. He stated he wanted to marry me. But not right away. We were together almost 5 years before he said yes. I wasn't going to give up on this man. Depression and suicide attempt 10 times. We both really liked each other until I heard slot of text messages from a stranger saying, "When do you want to meet up?" Next day. I proposed and she said no. I've already got someone else. She walked away and I've never been the same person. As a woman who was engaged and the proposal was later revoked. It still stings a little 11 years later. When you're sure you're with the love of your life. Losing them can really pop a hole in your life plans. When did you start to feel better? It's been 7 months and I still can't believe we're not getting married. I miss him and our dog and our house every day. But according to him, he ruined everything and doesn't want me back because our relationship will always be damaged. I feel like I've died. She was an art major and I had just joined the army. We had been lovers since high school. I asked. She said no. She wanted to get her master's. We were friends for a while but we don't talk anymore. She works as a bartender I think now. I ended up getting married to my best friend. We've been married for more than a decade and have a 5-year-old son. My mom and dad were not married and wanted a kid and had me. My dad, being Catholic and Hispanic, decided he wanted to be married to my mom and proposed. She said no because she hadn't been divorced from her first husband for very long and now had 3 young kids and preferred to stay not married. He threatened to leave her and got on his motorcycle and started to drive away until my mom chased him down and gave in, leading to what my parents call the voodoo wedding the same day. I was in a relationship with her for 5 years. Living together for 1. She had an infant daughter from a previous relationship with a drug addict who popped up occasionally. We moved together because her mother stole her rent money for months. I was feeling depressed and lost my job. I was diagnosed with clinical depression later when I sought help. I told her I wanted to move back to my parents' house as I was going mad. She said if I did, it would be all over between us. I moved in a week later. I tried to reach her and she had started a relationship with a biker she met while we were together. I went to her house and proposed. Got rejected. She had a hickey. It's been 5 years. She now has 2 more children. I started treatment for my depression. 3 more months to complete. Moved to another city and had a substantial boost on my salary. I'm feeling better than in the last 15 years. I asked a woman after almost 6 years together. She said no. And added that maybe it was time for us to go our separate ways. Whoa. Shock. But life has to go on. About a year later I met a different girl and we were engaged within a year. We were both ready for marriage. That was 16 years ago. We've got 3 terrific kids. 2 boys that are exceptional athletes and a girl who's a brainy little nerd. The lady who refused me eventually got married. Had a couple kids. And got divorced. But she got married again. And had another kid. And got divorced again. We completely lost touch several years ago. We were dating for a little over a year but I was so sure she was the one. I drove 2 hours to see her at her college and went on a beautiful winter night walk and proposed. She looks me right in the eyes and said, "Oh, you thought this was serious?" Well, I don't know how to say this other than I have been saying other people. Well, actually I have been seeing other women. I was stunned. I got up, put the ring in my pocket and walked to my car, got in and drove away, never looking back, crying the whole time. Haven't seen or spoken with her in 7 years even though she has tried countless times to reach out. Now it's a story I tell friends who are nervous about asking their significant others to marry them. Reminding them that even if they say no it could be worse. Yes, finally one of these that I can relate to. We met through family and I asked her to marry me. Made a romantic video and asked. She said she would think about it. Ignored me for 2 weeks and then said she thought about it and that she just didn't feel ready but wanted to be friends afterwards. Now here is the crazy part. For the longest part she was the one driving me crazy with marriage. SOOO happy we never got married. Well, she said yes but no. Met her online and we really hit it off. She was just amazing. We only knew each other for a month before she moved in with me and it was just magical. Proposed just after a year together. She had a genetic disorder and it made her heart swollen. Familial dilated cardiomyopathy and it was pretty bad. You could see her heart pushing out in between her ribs. She didn't want to get married because then we wouldn't be able to afford her checkups and medication. She was constantly quite weak but still full of life. She took naps very often and one day she just didn't wake up. I cried for days and was heartbroken for a couple years. I still think of her quite often and visit her grave whenever I visit home since it is 1,000 miles away now. I know I filled the end of her life with happiness as she told me very often. Just feel guilty sometimes. Not exactly the same thing. But I told my now wife the second day we were talking that I was going to marry her. Her response was, "I'll never get married again." We dated 6 months-ish, then she dumped me seemingly out of nowhere. We were broken up nearly 6 months before I unblocked her number and unblocked her on social media. When we met up again in person I gave her the biggest hug and kiss and just couldn't believe she was back. After tons of long talks and building our relationship back and way stronger we got engaged. I married the FCK out of her. And now we're happier and stronger than ever. I'm so glad it worked out this way. I love her more than I thought possible. I'm a lucky dude. Lol, I asked my wife. She knew it was coming. Got down on one knee. She said no. I blanched. She said just kidding, I swear it. We've been married 22 years last April. Every once in a while just for fun I bring it up. And she always apologizes. Lol. Didn't even get to ask. She broke up with me a few weeks after I bought the ring. She told me that she fell out of love with me and that she just wasn't happy with me anymore. We had been fighting a little bit because we were all cooped up during quarantine, but nothing too serious. I figured once everything started opening up and we could go do stuff that we'd both chill out. Well, instead my GF of 5 years decided to leave me. Then 1 week later she started dating another guy. She then told me she had feeling for that guy before we broke up, but that there was no overlap. I was devastated, of course. Returned the ring. And was very upset with her. She was my best friend for 15 years. I had known her since kindergarten. I was so mad and said some things that I regret, and I ended up begging for her forgiveness. Even though I was upset with her for leaving me, I couldn't go on without her at least being my friend. So one day we talked and I apologized and wished her well and told her I just want her to be happy. I miss her like crazy. But it's her life and she deserves to be happy. All of this happened last month. Mine is a little different. Mine said that she wasn't ready yet and asked me to wait and be patient with her. It helped that knew she had some issues with commitment and change. So I played the long game and waited her to make a decision. It took 3 years and the birth of our daughter for her to come up to me one day and say that getting married was interesting to her. One more kid and 21 years later we are still happily married. Not me, but my teacher proposed to another techer in the middle of all their colleges and she said no on that day. All his lessons were just silence and the techer just sitting in front of the class doing nothing. Everyone in the whole school knew it. Not quite what you asked. But my girlfriend at one time, 5 or 6 years ago, screamed at me during an argument, "I'll never marry you." To which I responded, "You don't hear me asking." We got married this past January. I have to use my throwaway BC, this might dox me. But my dad asked my mom to marry him several times and she kept saying no. She had been engaged before and it was a disaster relationship and she had decided she was never going to get married. But her and my dad stayed together. Finally, one day my dad says, "Sit down. We need to find a day that works where both our families can be in town for our wedding." And she was like, "Okay." And they got married. She loves that story, but he just rolls his eyes and goes, "Your mother is so difficult." They've been together for 32 years. Edit. Put 22 instead of 32. People who surprise their partners with engagements. Why do you think it's okay to force someone to make a major, life-changing legal decision on an emotionally stressful snap decision? No proposal should be a surprise. You discuss marriage as a couple and eventually both agree that you want it. Then, one day, one of you then surprises the other with a proposal. You know it will be a yes, because you spoke about it like adults. Out of context tip. You should both agree that you're going to propose from beforehand and the proposal should just be a nice surprise of when and how, not if. My mum and dad had been dating for a few months when my mum proposed to my dad. He said no. Not until he gets a proper job and can provide. A month later, he'd secured a job. They celebrated 32 years of marriage last month. After about a year I proposed to a beautiful woman with a beautiful 4-year daughter. Her brother and I were firefighters together and he set me up. She quickly said yes. I then asked her daughter if I could be her stepdad and she said yes. I should have realized something was off when she wanted to wait and tell her family. We waited for 2 months and then she broke it off. Her brother knew about the proposal and couldn't figure it out either. Come to find out she was secretly seeing another guy. Her family and her daughter were upset with her. Saw the daughter about 6 years later with her uncle and she said that her mom made a big mistake leaving me. She wished I was her stepdad. Dated my wife in high school. I was all wrong for her at the time. And it was going way too fast, so we broke up on good terms. One of the last times we talked, I asked her if she would marry me one day. She laughed it off and said no way. And said I was definitely not the marrying type. Fast forward to college. I was working full time and she was a law student. And she walked into the liquor store I was the manager of. We talked for an hour. And it continued in the parking lot. Just talking and catching up. At the end of the conversation as she was leaving, jokingly I asked her to marry me again. She laughed. I laughed. And she said we'll see. Married 16 years in October. And X200B. Edit. A word. My great grandpa had just entered a college after getting out of the army from World War II. He was at a dance but had broken his ankle wrestling with his friends. Cause he was 25 and did that for fun. So he goes to a dance. Where he meets my great grandma. He asks her to dance. And she later wrote as he only said yes because she thought he was a wounded vet. Which was technically true. The next day he asks her to marry him. She says she'll think about it and a week later they get married. First major GF. She was stunning. Modeled and I was besotted with her. Well, she started slipping away and I thought it'd be a great idea to propose to her and that way she'd be with me forever. Thankfully she was too smart for my desperation and turned me down flat, telling me upfront that she was too young to settle down and wanted fun. Losing her was more traumatic than being turned down and I struggled with despair, but I channeled myself into my career which took off. A few years later I found my true love and it was her that proposed to me. 26 years later we are still happy. As to my ex, I bore her no ill will and can only thank her for being smart enough to know that we were never destined to be together. I was the person who said no. We got into a big fight and I went to the kitchen to clean and get my mind straight. He eventually came into the kitchen but then proposed. We were young but I was really surprised. Also, to anyone proposing, I recommend not doing that as a way to try and patch things up. Nabra. This is like a delayed no. I proposed. She said yes. We set a date. 6 months before that we were talking and she suggested we postpone the wedding. I took that as a breakup and moved out. Not the best at communicating. A few months later, after us continuing to see each other, I suggested we get back together. She said, well, we might as well get married then. We got married 2 weeks later. That was over 13 years ago. So much for textbook. Dated a nurse in San Antonio in 1978. I asked and she said we didn't know each other well enough. I proposed to the next girl I dated. She said yes and we were married 29 years till she passed from cancer in 2007. Not exactly this. But I proposed. Got engaged for like 2 months. Then got my ring returned in a paper bag with very little explanation of what went wrong. It was horrible right after. Like. Couldn't stop thinking about it every second. Then every minute. Then every hour. Then every day. Then week. Then month. Then year. It's been over a decade now and it was the best thing that's ever happened to me. We were so wrong for each other and it was a toxic relationship. You can't see it until you've had some time outside of it to reflect and to meet someone you get along with so well you wonder why the hell you didn't meet them earlier. I was the one who wanted to marry my boyfriend. He said no and basically went off to live his own single life instead. It sucked and I still don't have the partner I'd hoped for to settle down with, but I'm hopeful the right one will come along when it's time. My grandparents. The most incredible love story I know. My gramps proposed to my grandmother on the 4th sentence he ever said to her. She laughed. Thought he was mad. And said no. She told him to meet him the next day. If he was serious. He did. And she said yes. 67 incredible years. Incredible stories and an incredible life. Today's their anniversary, so this is a wonderful day to share just a snippet of their story. Today would have been their 75th anniversary. Back in the 60s, my father proposed to his high school sweetheart shortly before he graduated. She was a year behind him. And only 16 at the time, and made the, much more mature, decision of answering not now. I'm only 16. But all he heard was no, and after a few months of fighting he broke things off with her. He met my mother a little while after he graduated and they married. They were together for 43 years and had 3 children before she passed in 2009. In 2017, my father reconnected with his old high school girlfriend at a funeral, as 70-year-olds apparently do, and they have started dating again. We, his kids, all really like her and are happy that he's not alone in his companionship. I asked if he thought he'd ever remarry, but he said that he had a wife and would be buried with her. I am so lucky to have had their relationship as the anchor of my childhood and look up to them as role models in my own relationships. I'm bummed I'm too late to this thread, but I'll share anyways. My mom was dating my dad's best friend in college. He always loved her, but she was with someone else. My mom got pregnant and her boyfriend, dad's best friend, left her. My dad decided to step up and offered to help her and be with her and support her. They eventually started officially dating. My dad proposed twice I think, and she said no both times but stayed together. My mom had my older brother and my dad was a father to him and continued to help raise him and support them both. Eventually, when my brother was like 7, me not born yet, he proposed again and she said yes. They've been married 32 years now. I asked her when I was 17 and she was 19. She said we weren't ready. After 10 years off and on we were married. We now have a 2-year-old daughter and a son on the way. I honestly never imagined this level of happiness was possible. That should have been the reddest flag amongst them all. 4 months later I discovered she had been cheating on me for 8 months. I walked away and spent a few years figuring out who I was and what I really wanted out of a relationship. About a year later I met my now wife and we're celebrating 13 years together this year, and she's the best thing that ever happened to me. I was with her for 6 years. 4 years and I popped the question. She said she didn't want to get married. I heard she didn't want to get married yet. So I stuck around. It was a mistake. I should have left when it became clear we had different plans for our lives. But I always thought she'd come around. It wasn't her fault, it was mine. When it ended I felt like I wasted at least those last 2 years. Love blinded me. I believed what I wanted to be able to stay in the relationship. Don't be like me. About 2 years ago I proposed to my GF at the time. We were dating for close to 4 years previous. I had it all planned for months. Take her to dinner in this nice flower park she loved and then pop the question. Everything went perfectly. Until the part where I got down on one knee and presented the ring. Long story short, she told me she couldn't cause she was cheating on me on and off for a year and told me I deserved better. We broke up and we don't talk anymore. Semi-related, my mom wanted to marry my dad for a long time. But my dad wasn't ready. So then eventually when my dad asked her, my mom thought he was joking, so she started laughing. Now 24 years later and still happily married. My mom still laughs when telling that story. My dad still doesn't. Met in college. Liked her a lot. Things were going great. But in retrospect there were so many reasons it was not ever going to work out. At some point, 4-6 months, she said if we were still together after a year that I should ask her to get married. I don't think I said okay. I think it was much more let's see and let's get there first. And X200B. Flash forward and we break up at 10 or 11 months. Probably took a good month to break up. At 12 months it was well over. But she still half jokingly brought up that I promised to ask her to marry me at 12 months. I said that I would ask her to marry me if she promised to say no. She said okay. So I asked and she said no. Kind of weird. But strangely cathartic. I met my wife about 8 months later. And we have been together for over 30 years and married for 25. We were friends. And we were kinda dating. Then we dated. Then I proposed the idea. She said hell no. Then we grew distant. Then we met up randomly while traveling separately in London by chance and talked over a cup of coffee. Found out she really liked me but had understandable concerns about the idea of marriage, childhood, past relationships. Then we walked and talked some more. Then we started dating again. Became real close. Closer than before. And now married and counting the days till our first child. I realized that we were in totally different spaces in our lives. So, I got incredibly f***ing hammered for the next few weeks. Ran away into the woods for a month or two. Then started dating again. 2 years later, I met my wife of over 10 years. She always had a good reason. Wait till you're out of grad school. Wait until you've got a job. You don't need the stress. Double quote. I asked and got postponed 6 times. The last time I got down on one knee at a stoplight in New York City. Firmly holding her hand. You're either in or you're out. And you better be quick because those cars will hit us. Double quote. I was the one who said no. I was 18 years old. Still in school and so not ready to get married. I wanted to travel. Work. Get life experience and the thought of marriage felt suffocating for me. He was not happy of course and we stuck around for a year or so and then I broke it off. We were very different in character. Wants and needs. So in hindsight it was bound for failure one way or the other. My little brother proposed to his high school sweetheart when they were nearing the end of uni together. She said no. And that she felt too young to be married. They loved each other and had lived together for years and nothing changed. That following Christmas she proposed to him. Close bracket. I was 23 and had lived abroad, was absolutely ready to find someone I care about, then found a girl. Broke up with her and immediately met another, but I was burnt out. Within 3 months, 2 were long distance international. I knew she was the one. I proposed. After a night of drinking. HAGTFO. I love you but you're drunk. A week later at a picnic. I don't know. We are too young. She was 21. Finally. On a hike. In front of a waterfall with a small ring. We were young. She said yes. That was 11 years and 4 kids ago. She is everything I could have dreamed of. Love you, Jay. I'm not a man but rather a woman. And when I first proposed to my now wife she said no, not because we weren't in love. But because she had a very strong belief that gay people should not compromise themselves by accepting a half-assed attempt at being egalitarian from the governing political party. At the time the option was civil partnerships. I accepted that without question. When it became illegal for LGBTQ+ people to marry their same-sex partners she asked me immediately and I said yes, of course. We are now married. This comment will probably get buried. It happened about 5 years ago. We tried to stay friends. But didn't really work out. She moved on. And I moved on and became severely depressed. Things did get better. And I've been in other relationships since then. But every time I think about her, I just remember all the happy times and become sad again. After 3 years dating I asked and was told no. Not right now. 1. 5 years later I asked and was told no. Not right now. A year later I warned her that at some point in the next year I would ask and want a definite yes or no. 8 months later she said yes. Been married 30 years as of the 20th of May 2020. She said no and then asked me 2 months later. She was dealing with her own self-image and self-worth. She had to sort out her mental health and didn't think she was good enough. We have now been married for 3 years and have a beautiful son. She's the love of my life and just needed time to realize I wasn't going anywhere. I'm the female who said no. And planned pregnancy 3 months into a relationship in which we were both each other's rebounds after long-term relationships. Tell my boyfriend I'm pregnant and after about 14 minutes of silence. He asks me, now don't get mad. But what if we got married for insurance purposes? Totally romantic. Right? I thanked him for offering but declined. Told him I had health insurance and would be fine. Somehow we ended up getting married about 2 months before the baby was born. There was no real proposal, just sorta talked about it and decided to go for it. Just celebrated our 13th wedding anniversary. I'm still not on his insurance. It happened more than 20 years ago. In the beginning I was hit pretty badly. It was a kick at my heart. Had known her for just 3 years. But loved her so much. After the no, it took me a couple of years to get over it. But I was really looking her with rose-colored glasses. She totally wasn't what I imagined. Or what I needed. So I send my blesses every time I happen to think of her. I just want to comment as woman on this. I said no. I carried a lot of trauma from my incredible failure of a first marriage. Didn't want to do that to him. Told him I had a lot of baggage. His words were, well, let me help you unpack it. Double quote. We've been married for 8 years and have an amazing daughter. She didn't say yes. Then later realized that we were meant to be together, which was what I knew. Then after that realized she was meant to be together but with her previous boyfriend. I had to go no contact. They are married with kids. I went through hell and came out the other side and married and had great kids. She eventually friended me on FB but we never exchanged messages and I've been out of FB for several years. This was 25 years ago and I haven't spoken to her in more than 20 years. Though I think about her and I expect always will. My grandma was proposed to 19 times and said no to the first 18. It was during the war and all the men were going away. She was beautiful, smart, funny, wealthy family. They all asked intending to have married her when they returned. She had eyes for my grandpa, from a super poor family, though, and he went to war, World War II veteran. Her family hated him because he wasn't wealthy but she didn't care. Traded that life in for him. He came home and they started dating. He went to college for teaching before they married, so they were married in their late 20s. Much older back then than was normal. Married 50 plus years. 5 kids. Best Grammy and Papa ever. My parents met on a blind date. My dad asked my mom to marry her after 2 weeks of dating. She said no. He tried again after a few more weeks and she said yes. They were married for about 10 years. They divorced because he was apparently verbally abusive. They had agreed that he would go to school while she took care of me and my sister. When he finished, she said okay. My turn now, and he laughed in her face. I've learned from her to never take any tea from anyone. She said yes but had changed her mind by morning. We were overseas so the flight back was awful. She told her mum, who met us at the airport all excited. We pretended it was still on. The next day I met with her and took the ring back. I traded it for a trip to the US. That was all 3 years ago. My self-esteem suffered tremendous harm. I haven't had a girlfriend since. Looking back, I'm glad we didn't marry. I just wish she had figured out that she didn't love me a little earlier. She was the one who kept suggesting it was time to get married. I've spent the past few years working on myself and I don't want to be dramatic, but honestly, there's the person I was before and there's the person I have been ever since. Overall, I wouldn't recommend the experience. 1 star. I have been married more than once. When my BF and I had been living together about a year, he asked me and I said no. I had been married and just didn't want to go down that path again. 3 years later I had to go away from home for a few days. It was the first time in 3 years we had been away from each other. I realized on the second day that I couldn't live without him. I called him up and said, hey, remember how you said you wanted to marry me? He said, yeah, why? I said, well, if you still want it, I'm ready. He asked what had changed and I told him, and that was that. We got married 3 months later and have been together almost 14 years. It's been awesome. We have our ups and downs, but he is legit the best thing that ever happened to me.